Hello, today we have with us Melissa Barker, and she will be presenting
museum. Been doing that for 14 years. I'm also a professional genealogist with expert in Tennessee records, and I've been doing that for 21 years, and I've been researching my own family history for the past 35 years. And so researching our family history is so very important. But once we have that research completed, or we have received documents, records, photographs, and ephemera from our family members or been handed down to us, we really do need to know how to preserve those items so that they will survive us. This presentation is sponsored by the Kentucky Genealogical Society. I am actually on their board of directors, and I would encourage you to go to their website, check it out, especially if you have Kentucky ancestors. The Kentucky Genealogical Society is one of the best genealogical societies in the entire United States. So genealogists, they are home archivists. I truly believe that. I'm going to show you how we have some things in common. We as genealogists and archivists collect old records. Archivists do the same thing in their archives as we as genealogists also collect those old records. Another thing that we have in common is that we want to preserve these records, photographs, artifacts, and ephemera so that future descendants and generations can enjoy those records. Don't we wish our ancestors had hung on to those records, taken care of them, and handed them down. So if you have original records, photographs, and artifacts, take care of them, learn to preserve them, and then hand them down to those generations. Also, genealogists and archivists like to share this information with other researchers, with family members, with those in the community, because all of the genealogy and history within our family is also the history of our local communities. So that's something we also share that's in common. And we both love the stories that these records, photographs, and artifacts tell. And so as archivists, I love to tell the stories of the records we have in our archives. And me as a genealogist, I love to tell the stories that my own family records tell. So today in this presentation, we're going to talk about these things. We're going to talk about a dedicated working space, original order, home archivist toolkit, and I'm actually going to show you how to put together an actual toolkit. Binders, folders, and boxes. There's all kinds of ways to organize your records. Unfolding and flattening records, cleaning records, removing hazards. Did you know your records could have hazards in them? And then lastly, we're going to talk about record storage, climate controls, and then consulting with the conservator. So let's start with the dedicated working space. I always encourage genealogists to have a dedicated working space wherever it is that they have do their genealogy in their home. Now, you don't have to have an office like in archives, but just a space that you can call your own, that you can come back to often, that's comfortable, that's peaceful, someplace that you can actually do your genealogy research, but also work on records preservation. So as archivists, we have our own spaces in our archives. Each of my volunteers have their own space. And so having that dedicated working space will give you that peace and also will give you a comfort to be able to not only do genealogy research, but help you to preserve those records. You want to have your home archivist toolkit at the ready, and I'm going to show you how to put that toolkit together and what tools you need to buy to put in that toolkit. One of the things I encourage genealogists when they have their own working space and they're working on their records to work on one collection of records at a time. This is what we do in the archives. We do not have several different kinds of collections out and working on them simultaneously because we might get things mixed up. And so work on one collection of records, one stack of records, one folder of records, one box of records, one container full of photographs. Work on those one at a time, and that way you can give them your full attention. Also, they won't get mixed up with other records. And this one kind of gets genealogists when I talk about it, but clean up your space at the end of the day. I encourage my volunteers at the archives to do this. I try to do this in the archives. It does a couple of things. When you're cleaning up your space at the end of the day or at the end of the time when you're working, sometimes you will find pieces of documents or a photograph or something you failed to put back in a collection or back in a file folder or a box. So you can clean that up. Also, if your space is cleaned up, when you come back to that space to do more work, you'll be more inclined to want to work in that space because if it's already cleaned up, you're ready to go. There's nothing worse than having to come back to a space and have to clean it up first before you can actually do the fun stuff. And so clean up your space, get it tidy before you leave your space for the end of the day or for the end of the hour or the afternoon that you've worked at that space. So let's next talk about original order. Original order is actually a first principle of archiving records, and it is also can be very important depending on your records and how you've received those records and getting them organized and preserved. So the Society of American Archivists Glossary of Terms defines original order as the fundamental principle of archives. It's maintaining records in original order serves two purposes. First, it preserves existing relationships and evidential significance that can be inferred from the context of the records. And second, it exploits the record creators' mechanisms to access the records, saving the archives the work of creating new access tools. So original order is essentially keeping things in the order that you receive them. For instance, let's look at a scrapbook. When you receive a scrapbook, you don't take it apart and put it in a different kind of order. You leave it in the order that the person who made that scrapbook put it in. There's maybe a reason why it's in a particular order. It could be in chronological order. It could be in family order. And so sometimes that can help you tell a story you're trying to tell or help you follow that information line if you need to do that.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, Melissa. It looks like your slides aren't, we're not seeing which slide you're on. We're just seeing the one page with the very
Oh,
first slide.
oh, really? Okay. Well, I'm going to come out and go back. Let's come all the way out and I'll do it again. Well, I came way too out. I actually exited out. Thank you for telling me that, though.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, let's try this again. Can you see that? Is it moving now?
No, we just see
Okay.
the first slide.
Okay. Is there something I'm not doing in the sharing process then? I'm hitting present and it says share screen. And it says share screen, so I hit that again. And then I hit window. Is that correct?
So if you hit window, it will share a window. I wonder if it was sharing the wrong window.
I don't know. I'm hitting my presentation and then I'm hitting share and it's showing you my first screen, but I wonder why it's not advancing. That's what I want to know. Is that advancing?
Yes.
Okay. Can I present it this way then? Would that be okay with you?
It's okay with me.
Okay. I'm going to present it this way so that we can move on.
Okay. Cool.
I don't want to take up any more time. So this is where I talked about what we're going to talk about in the presentation. We talked about a dedicated working space, and we went through that. So I'm going to go through this really quickly. An original order, that's what we were talking about. Here's the definition that I described. And then our ancestors may have a reason for how they put together that scrapbook or photo album. So that's why we want to pay close attention to original order. Boxes of records may have been packed in a certain way. In an archives world, that's sometimes what we look at. We look at how boxes of records have been packed. These binders, file folders, stacks of records even could have been put together in such a way that it helps us follow that original order. We want to keep that original order because it helps us tell our ancestors' story in a particular sequence. Again, you may not have ever thought about original order, but it may be something you might want to pay attention to the next time you receive some records from a family member or you inherit records. So let's talk about some organizational methods. There are as many types of organizational methods as there are people out there. So we really can't go over all of them. I'm going to talk about two individual organizational methods, and these are the two that I have used for the past 35 years. I used one for a certain amount of years, and then I swapped over to another one. So also don't be afraid to swap your organizational method mid-research or midstream. Many times as we're beginning genealogists, we find an organizational method that's fantastic and we love it. But then sometimes as we grow as genealogists, we find that the organizational method just doesn't work. So we want to find another method. One of the things that you need to keep in mind is that you need to choose a method that works well for you. Because somebody else uses a certain method and talks about how wonderful it is, it may not be a method that works for you. So if you'll just find a method that works for you and just be consistent in that method, I think you'll be successful. Being consistent is the key. We don't want to have part of our genealogy organized one way, another part of our genealogy organized another way. So we want to find one way and use that method consistently throughout our organization and throughout our genealogy. We want to use archival materials. These are materials that have been, that are considered acid-free, lignet-free. They've passed the PAT. They are approved by archivists and archival stores. We need to find these materials because our documents, especially our original documents, are going to be stored in these archival materials. And we want those materials to protect our records and help them to last. So let's talk about the binder organizational method. This is the method that I started with back 35 years ago. This is a 3-ring binder method. Many of you probably use this method. There's actually many ways you can actually put together your binders, but I want to talk about how I did mine. So this method is where you use three-ring binders, and you use document sleeves, and you organize your genealogical documents within these binders. Now, what I did is I used a binder for each surname. I put a label on the outside on the spine that had the surname, and then within that binder, I used tabbed dividers, and in between those tab dividers, I put particular record groups. For instance, I would have all the birth records together behind one tab, all the death certificates behind another, and so on. So you can label your binders by surname. I've also seen people who take and put a binder for each individual ancestor. Sometimes you can do that, but this, in my case, I use the surname part. So within that binder, you're going to arrange your documents in an organizational method. There are different ways to do that as well. Like I said, the way I did it is I put all the birth records behind one tab, all the death records behind another tab, and you may decide to do it differently. I've actually seen people who use these dividers, and they put each ancestor's records behind each divider. So again, find a method that works for you and just be consistent. This is, I think, a great organizational method for beginners, beginning genealogists, or for those who have a tremendous amount of records to organize and you want to organize them quickly. And so many times people start out using this method and they might swap to another method. And so it's important that you find a method that works for you and can be consistent. And if you're using the binder method and it is working for you today, then there's absolutely no reason why that you should change. Even if I show you a different method, you might try it. But if you're using a method that's working for you, you like it, don't change midstream unless you're having some issues. Archivist tip about using binders. I would encourage you to lay your binders flat when storing them on shelves, because many times our binders are not completely 100% full. So if you put them up on their edge, on the binder's binding, then if you have those records in the binders, they could sag or droop or bend, and then you're damaging your documents. And so we always encourage people to lay their binders flat on their shelves. The next type of method, if you want to try it, is the folder method. Now, there came a point in time, and I'm going to say this has probably been about 15 years ago, that I found that my binder method was just not working for me. So I sought out another method to do my organization of my family records. And I chose this method, and this is the method that I use today, and that's the folder method. Many of you may be using the folder method. And just like with the binder method, there are all kinds of different ways to do the folder method. So I'm going to show you what I did. This method is where you use documents, and you take your documents for every individual person and you file them in file folders. The reason I swapped from the binder method to the folder method was because I found that it was very cumbersome for me to pull out an entire binder of records to look at only one person's records. And then I had to flip from one to the other, looking for individual records for a person. So I decided to take all of that person's records and put them in a file folder and arrange them chronologically. This way, as I'm researching an individual person, I can go to my filing cabinet, pull out that person's file, lay it on my desk, and look at only their records. I don't have to worry about flipping through the other family records within that surname. So this is how I use the folder method. Many folder methods are arranged in filing cabinets or boxes, and they're arranged by surname. So within my filing cabinet, I have dividers within my filing cabinet that have tabs that have surnames, and behind those tab dividers are the file folders for those individuals within that surname. Again, archives use the folder method when they're organizing their vertical files collections. If you don't know what vertical files are, they are a hodgepodge of records that archives collect and are stored in file folders and in filing cabinets. And they're, again, organized by surname or subject name. Maybe one of a downside for this particular method is that you do have to have room for filing cabinets or for stacking of boxes, because they're going to fill up. If you do a file folder for an individual ancestor, many of your individual ancestors, you're going to have not several, but one or two filing cabinets and probably several boxes. So if you don't have room for that, it may be you need to stick with something like a binder method. But I have found that this folder method really helps me to see each individual individual person's records in a complete form so I don't miss something, and it actually works much better for me. And so whether you use the binder method or the folder method, again, find a method. Even if it's not these two, find the method that works for you and just be consistent throughout your research. So let's talk about the Home Archivist Toolbox. We're going to actually put together one, and I encourage you to put together your own Archivist Toolbox for your home, because you may need to use some of these materials as you're preserving and working with your records. So first and foremost, even to have a toolbox, we have to purchase a toolbox. So you don't have to go out and get one of those big, large orange ones with wheels that you see in a garage. You just need to get one of these little handheld toolboxes. I call it a grandma toolbox. And this is where we're going to put our tools in. Believe me, it will be big enough. There's not that many tools. And when you put your toolbox together, just have it in your dedicated space, ready to use when you need a tool out of your toolbox. We put these together for our volunteers at the archives, and each of our volunteers get a toolbox because we all have these tools I'm going to show you, and we use them almost on a daily basis. And so you need to have these so that when you do come across something, one of your documents that needs attention, you have the tools to do what you need to do. So what are we going to put in our toolbox? Well, first and foremost, we're going to put soft number 2 pencils. I am asked all the time as an archivist, what should I use to write on my documents or to write on the back of my photographs? Well, first and foremost, I would encourage you to not write on documents or photographs. Find another way of documenting the information. However, there does come times when we need to do that. So our recommendation as archivists is to use soft number 2 pencils. You can find them absolutely anywhere, and get a few of them and put them in your toolbox. There are going to be certain documents, and especially certain photographs, that pencil writing will not show up on. And one of the examples that I use are Polaroid photographs. Polaroid photographs will not show pencil writing. And so there is such a thing as an archival pen. This is an example. It's called an IdentiPen. There are other types of these types of pens under different names. I would encourage you to put one of these in your toolbox. So if you have to use it, it does look like a Sharpie, but it is not a Sharpie. So I would encourage you not to use any kind of a marker. Actually use those pens that are rated and used by archivists and used for archiving and records. Next are soft bristle brushes. We use these all the time in the archives to help us with our records. And you don't need to go out and get expensive brushes. Just go down to that store that's everything is $1 and pick up some makeup brushes. Makeup brushes come in different shapes and sizes. They come with big, large bristles and heads on them, down to very much smaller ones. And so get you a variety of sizes and put them in your toolbox. So when you need a soft bristle brush, you will have them ready. We use these to when we are doing scrapbooks or family Bibles or anything that has a binding. We use our soft bristle brushes to clean out in between the pages or in the binding area, because sometimes there is dust or there's fragments from the pages in there, and those brushes are fantastic for this. They also will brush off surface dirt off of documents. Next is a micro spatula. This is actually a specific tool that archivists use. And this is actually a multi-tool. Archivists use this for literally a few dozen things. We always go to our micro spatula when we need a tool to do something. You can purchase these anywhere. They're very inexpensive, and they are a great asset to any archivist, but to any home archivist. And so that's why I encourage you to put one in your toolbox. We use these to remove staples. We use these to remove hazards out of documents. There's many, many uses, and you can purchase micro spatulas in singulars, just like they're on the right, that picture on the right, or you can purchase multiple packs that have different size heads on them. Next is gloves. I would encourage you to purchase a couple of pairs of gloves and put them in your toolbox. There's always been a controversy about whether or not we use gloves in the archives to handle documents, photographs, or whatever it is that we have in our records. Well, over the years, this has gone back and forth whether or not to use gloves, whether we do, whether we don't. And so finally, for the past few years, we've settled on the fact that we should only be wearing gloves when we have to handle documents, photo slides, or negatives. If we're handling photographs, photo slides, and negatives, we do not need to wear gloves when we're handling our documents. One of the things that takes place when you have gloves on and you handle documents is you lose the tactile sensation in your hands and fingertips. When you do that, you really run a risk of damaging your documents because you can't feel how you're handling them, and you could actually cause more damage by wearing gloves than not wearing gloves. But if you're going to be handling photographs, photo slides, or negatives, then you do need to wear gloves. So what kind of gloves? It's up to you. You could get the traditional white cotton gloves there that you see on the left. However, I find that they do get dirty very quickly, and you have to replace them often because we don't encourage you to wash them and then put them back, because the chemicals in the soap that you use to wash things with will transfer to your documents. But you can also get the nitrile gloves. Those are, you can get the big pack of them, get a lot of them in a pack, and they're disposable. Once you've used them, if they get dirty, you can just throw them away and get another pair. I would encourage you to get the powder-free kind, because the powder inside of them, even though that's there to help you put them on and take them off, the powder is not archival, and you don't want that to get onto your documents or photographs. If you're allergic to latex, they make latex-free gloves, and so I would encourage you to get some of these and put them in your toolbox, so when you have to handle those precious photographs, photo slides, and negatives, you have your gloves ready. Next is the Cert and Dirt Cleaning Sponge. This is a unique product, one that we use in the archives almost on a daily basis. You will not use this with any chemicals, with any liquids. You will use it just as you see it. It comes in a brick like this, and we encourage people to actually cut this into pieces so that you can handle it in your hand, and you can clean your documents. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. There's a picture there on the right that shows you a clean piece of the sponge, and then a piece where I use that on one document that you couldn't even see with the naked eye, the dirt on the document, but that is how much dirt it picked up. And so these sponges are fantastic. You can purchase them just about anywhere. And if you have one of these in your toolkit, and you inherit or you receive documents that have some dirt on them, or that are dirty, or that need some cleaning, then you'll have this sponge ready to go. And again, they are fantastic tools to help us take care and preserve our documents and ephemera. Next is document repair tape. You're going to hear me say that there's no such thing as archival tape. However, there is, but we encourage people not to use tape on documents. But there are times, specific times, when we do need to use a little bit of repair tape. This is archival repair tape. I encourage you to get a box of this and put it in your toolkit in case you need it. However, I would encourage you to use it very sparingly. This type of tape is, once you put it on the document, for a few minutes after you put it on there, it can be removed or it can be lifted up and repositioned, but then after a little while it does stick permanently. And this particular type of tape, it can help you with rips or tears. However, we do, number one, encourage you to put those documents in archival sleeves. The static electricity with those sleeves actually comes around the document and should keep the document together, so you won't have to use that tape. But it is something to have, a tool to have if you need to have it. We're going to talk more about some of those tools here in just a minute. First, we're going to talk about unfolding and flattening records. Many of us have records in our possession that are folded. Maybe those are old family letters. Maybe those are some maps. Maybe they're just typical deeds that have been folded, or some other legal documents. One of the things that we do in the archives is that we try to flatten everything. And why do we do that? Because the constant idea of unfolding and folding documents can be very detrimental to our documents. So one of the first steps that we take in the archives and when we're processing records is that we unfold as much as we possibly can. We get everything as flat as we can. So for instance, in this photograph, you see a letter and an envelope, and you see the letter's been in that envelope a long time. And as we took it out, it does not naturally lay flat on the table. It still stayed in the folded position. So as home archivist, as yourself, if you have folded documents, we should carefully unfold and flatten those records and keep those family documents as flat as we can as we preserve them and as we store them. One of the things that happens with folded documents is that the crease lines where they've been folded and unfolded will eventually fail. The fibers in the paper gets folded and unfolded, and those fibers will break. And as they continue to break, they will eventually fail, and they will cause the document to literally come apart. And you'll see an example of that here in just a second. And so archiving your documents in a flattened state will mean that they will less likely have damage done to them. And also, believe it or not, they're much easier to share with family members when they are flat. If they're still in their envelopes or still in their folded stage, you may not feel comfortable unfolding them, especially if they're a little bit fragile. So if you have flattened them and put them in archival sleeves, then when you can bring them out, you can show them to family members and you're not so worried about the damage that you could do. So let's talk about cleaning records. Cleaning records is another step that we take in the archives, especially when we have unfolded many of our records. So let's talk about how we do that and how you can do that with some of your tools that I've talked about that are in your toolkit. So there are some records that come to us in the archives that are dirty, and you may have the same thing. Many of these records are stored in attics and basements and barns and outbuildings. Some of the records that we receive at a county archive have been stored in a courthouse near a coal stove. For back in the day when they used coal to heat, that coal, that soot got on many of our records, and so we've been doing a lot of cleaning on them. And so maybe you have received some dirty records or some records that have soot on them or some dust or have been not stored properly, and you want to know how to clean them. So much of this soot and dust and other grime that's on your documents needs to be removed, because this soot, dust, and grime, it's very abrasive. And the longer it stays on our documents, the more it can scratch and even leads to a more permanent damage to our records. So it's important for us to try to remove that. And it can be done gently. You don't want to go at this with chemicals, with any kind of cleaning solutions. You're going to use the tools that I've already talked about, and I'll talk about it more in detail. You need to use the right tools. And I've told you about these tools already. And if you have your toolkit, your home archivist toolkit at your side when you're working on your records, you'll have those tools available to you. So when we're cleaning documents, we pull out our soft bristle brushes. Again, I already mentioned we use these soft bristle brushes to sweep off surface dirt, surface dust. And in scrapbooks or any kind of a book that has a binding, we try to get into the binding, into in between each pages to remove some of the dirt there. And so that's how come I told you to get these brushes, because they're important. They're used on a lot of our records to get them as clean as we can. There is that certain cleaning sponges again. I had mentioned to you to put one of these in your kit, and we're going to use them to clean our documents. Again, they come in a brick like this, but cut them down so you can hold a piece in your hand, because if you use just the whole brick there, it's very cumbersome, and you don't want to do that. So how do we clean a document with one of these sponges? Well, we do it very carefully. First and foremost, you're going to lay your document on a solid, clean surface. And then you're going to place your hand in the middle of that document. It's extremely important that you do that, because if you do not support the document, then you're going to tear it. I have seen it done many, many times. If you just take that sponge and swipe it across that document without any support, you're going to tear it. So put your hand in the middle of the document, and then using your sponge, you're going to wipe the sponge. You're not going to bear down. You're not going to scrub. You're going to gently swipe that sponge across the middle of the document out to the edges of the document, gently running it over the page, and try to pick up as much soot and dust as you can. You want to work in small areas at a time. You don't want to just go through the whole page using your sponge. Work in those small areas to get each and every small area clean. And by the time you do all the small areas, you'll have the entire document clean. I cannot emphasize enough that you should never use these sponges on pencil writing. And I have it in bold and underlined with an exclamation point. And I'll tell you a little story about that. When I was going back to school to become an archivist, that our teachers decided to kind of play a trick on us students. They gave us what we thought at the time were original old documents from the 1800s that were written in pencil. And then they told us to clean those documents. We had already been trained on how to do this. Well, as we started to clean the documents, we all were gasping in horror because the pencil writing was being erased. So we got a very good lesson. Those documents were not original. They had produced those documents to teach us this very important lesson. And remember, it has stuck with me this entire time. And so do not use sponges on pencil writing because it will literally erase that pencil off the document. Next, we want to talk about removing hazards from our documents. You probably never realized that your documents had hazards attached to them, but they do, and they can be extremely damaging to your documents. Metal. Metal is the #1 hazard that we find on documents. Metal is very destructive. Metal has been used for 100 years to put documents, two pieces of a document together. However, one of the things that we do in the archives is that we spend a lot of time removing metal from our documents. You see that box there with a bunch of paper clips and rubber bands and all kinds of metal things because we do remove these from documents. We also remove rubber bands from our documents. You may have a stack of old family letters that has a rubber band around it. I would encourage you to remove it. It does a couple of things, and it'll go into detail here in a minute about rubber bands. They're extremely destructive. Not only when you have rubber bands around documents or around a stack of old family letters, they're binding and they are actually damaging the fibers in the paper and they're breaking those fibers down, which is causing damage. Also, rubber bands they do something different. The chemicals in them as they age, they break down. And you will either have rubber bands that will become so brittle that when you touch them, they fall off your document, which is what you want. But another scenario is where these rubber bands break down to the point where they become like a sticky glue and they stick to documents and it's almost nearly impossible to get them off. And then they leave a yellowy orange stain on your document. So we do not want to have rubber bands on our documents. And tape. Any kind of tape we do not want to put on our documents, and we try to remove them from our documents. There are going to be instances where you can't remove it, but we want to try to remove that tape. Again, just like rubber bands, tape can be very destructive. It could actually get so the chemicals in them can actually deteriorate to such a point that becomes like glue and it sticks to our documents. So here's as an example. This is a document that had a piece of tape on it, as you can see there. And we removed the tape, but it still left a yellowy orange stain, which cannot be removed, not even with the cleaning sponge. It's there forever. Luckily, you can still read the words and letters underneath it. But this is not what you want on your documents. You don't want this kind of damage on your documents from tape or rubber bands or from rusted metal. Here are some things that are of a metal content that you may have on your documents that you really should be removing. Well, staples is one. Paper clips, straight pins, grommets, hairpins. There was a period of time in our past where a lot of people used hairpins to put pieces of paper together. Binding clips, anything that bind, and any kind of metal fastener. We should never be using these on our family documents. These are actually more modern, and I say modern within the last 50 to 75 years that I have seen people use. These are binding clips. The one there in the bottom right, I see more in court records, grommets, any kind of these metal things that are on your documents. I would encourage you to remove. If you don't remove them, you might have something like this. Metal will rust. And people say, well, I will use stainless steel paper clips. Stainless steel, given enough moisture exposure, will rust. We actually in our archives had to clean out a storage area where a lot of records, county records, were stored. These records only dated back to the 1990s, not the 1890s, the 1990s. They had stainless steel paper clips on them, and because of the moisture they were exposed to, they had rusted. And not only did they rust, but they actually were all sticking to the document. So in this case, in this photograph, you see the rust, you see where the paper clips were, and then once that rust starts on a document, it actually starts eating away. And so that's why we don't want to use metal on any of our documents. How do we remove some of these metal things from our documents? Well, we get out our micro spatula that we have in our toolkit. There's a little picture there about how to remove a staple, and that's a very rusty staple. We take the document, turn it upside down. We lift up what I call the legs of the staple, so they're sticking straight up. Turn the document back over and put our micro spatula under the head of the staple and gently pull it out. This is how we remove staples in the archives, because we don't want to damage the documents by removing them. We don't want to use things like this. These are things that are used probably in offices today to remove staples, but they're very damaging. The claw staple remover literally yanks the staple out, as well as that wand staple remover that does the same thing. And when you do that, you run the risk of tearing and damaging your documents. So use your micro spatula, like I suggested, to remove staples, to remove paper clips if you need to, because especially sometimes those paper clips will adhere to the document, or you may have a hard time getting them off. Use your micro spatula to do that. Again, we do not want to have staples, metal on our documents, and then have that rust take place. It will just becomes a mess. Our documents are very precious, and we need to preserve them. We also need to remove things that bind. Whatever it is on our documents that is binding our documents, we should be removing them. So what kind of things am I talking about? Well, rubber bands, I've already mentioned rubber bands. You may find that you have some things that are tied together with twine, with rope. I've actually seen shoestrings used like rubber bands. Hair ribbons, which I'll talk about hair ribbons a little bit. It's a little bit more special. And yes, Band-Aids. I have actually run across documents in our archives where they must have ran out of anything and everything to use to put two pieces of paper together. And for some reason, they pulled out Band-Aids and used Band-Aids. Now, when it comes to hair ribbons, you may have a stack of love letters that are tied together with a hair ribbon. Yes, you want to remove the hair ribbon, but don't throw the hair ribbon away, because the hair ribbon is actually part of the history of those letters. And so I would archive the hair ribbon right along with those letters. Don't throw the hair ribbon away, because that actually has a personal historical touch to those letters. So removing things that bind, these items can bind your documents together and damage them. Again, remember, our paper products, our paper documents have fibers in them. And if you're tying and binding those documents, those fibers are going to break, they're going to wear down, and then they're going to start falling apart. Again, I'd mentioned this about rubber bands. Rubber bands can deteriorate to the point of sticking to your documents. And if you've ever come across an old rubber band, it is absolutely a horrible situation. So here's an example of that. This is a document where the rubber band has deteriorated to the point that it is literally stuck to the document. So what did we do? We pulled out our handy dandy micro spatula. We started chipping away at that rubber band that was stuck to this document. But again, even though we got the rubber band off, it still left a yellowy orange stain that is there today. Twine, rope, shoestrings, anything that is tied around your documents, I would encourage you to remove, because they're going to cause damage. And again, those hair ribbons, I remove them, but archive them. Place them in a little box with the letters, or place them in an archival sleeve with your letters, and make a note. Make a historical note about the hair ribbon, that it was tied around these love letters, and maybe it belonged to one of the authors or one of the recipients of the letters, and that's why it's part of that collection. So let's talk a minute about removing tape. It can be a very difficult thing to do. And so I would encourage you that if you don't feel comfortable doing this on your own, to reach out to a conservator. We'll talk in more detail at the end of the presentation about how to contact a conservator and where to find one. So removing a tape can be difficult. This is actually a newspaper article, and just like rubber bands, tape will deteriorate to the point where it literally will melt into the document. And in this case, on this particular document, that's what happened. The tape was exposed to heat, to extreme heat, and in storage. And so it actually melted into this newspaper clipping. And it literally is part of this newspaper clipping now. We have left it alone. We have encapsulated into an archival sleeve so that it does not touch other documents, because newspaper print is very acidic. If you have newspaper print in your collections, I would encourage you to separate it from your other documents, because if you've ever seen a newspaper print, a newspaper clipping that has been laying on another document, when you pick it up, it has left a stain on that other document. And you don't want that to happen to really important vital records or really important court records or original family records. So we always keep newspaper print away from other documents. If the tape has become hard and brittle, a lot of times if you just touch it, it actually will just fall off, which is the best case scenario. Again, it's still going to leave that yellowy orangey stain on the document, but at least you can get the tape off. If that tape has adhered to that document, it has become glue-like or gummy, it's best to actually leave it alone, because you're going to cause more damage to the document trying to remove it than you would if you just left it alone. There are paper conservators out there that, if your document that this is on is extremely historically important to you or to your family or even to your community, it might be advantageous to spend the money to get it conserved. If you have tape that is attaching two pieces of paper together like a paper clip, and believe me, I've seen it done that way as well, just use a pair of scissors and clip the tape in the middle to pull those two pieces of paper apart. If the tape can come off, that's great. If it has adhered itself very well to the document, I would leave it alone. So I've told you a lot about what is not safe to use. And so probably you're wondering, well, what can I use? There are some things you can use, although we strongly encourage not using any kind of binding or any kind of clips or anything like that if you can help it. But we understand that there are times when we are concerned about, if we have a document collection that is 2, 3, 4 pages long, that we may lose one of those pages if we don't put them together. So we can use plastic paper clips. We can get the paper clips that are entirely made of plastic, or we can get the plastic coated stainless steel paper clips. The only thing I would encourage or tell you about the plastic coated stainless steel paper clips is to make sure when you purchase them that you inspect them. Many times in the processing of these paper clips, the plastic coating does not get on all of the metal. Sometimes some of it's missed. So just make sure that none of the metal is showing if you're going to use these types of paper clips. Again, these are a binding agent. If you put too many pieces of paper together and put one of these on there, it's going to put pressure on the corner of that document wherever you've put these paper clips. And again, it's going to break down those fibers. That's why we encourage people not to use anything if you can help it. But we also see and understand that there are times when we need to use things. So plastic paper clips, or those plastic coated paper clips, is what we suggest. And so what kind of archival tape should we use? I've already talked to you about this when we were talking about putting together our toolkit. And so we have archival tape. You're going to see it called Filmoplast, or you're going to say document repair tape. This comes under different names, but it is a tool that we can use for minor and small rips and tears in our documents. That just happens. We may have inherited them that way, or they may have become that way. We have some rips and tears, and it may be that we want to keep those rips and tears from getting larger and more damaging. So it would be acceptable to use a small piece of archival tape. Again, I would use it sparingly. Because we don't want to use tape on the entire document or on lots of documents. Use it for only those small rips and tears that we think are going to get worse if we don't put something on there. I would encourage you to put the tape on the back of the document or where there's no writing. If If it's written on both sides, it's difficult. Just put it where you can. But if you can, put it on the back of the document or where there is no writing if possible. For severely damaged documents, and especially if they're original, one of a kind, extremely important to your family, or even extremely historical to the community, to your state or your country, I would encourage you to contact a conservator and have them look at the document and see what they can do. So when you use archival tape, this is kind of what it looks like. I had mentioned that you can actually read through the tape. It is not completely clear, but you can read through it. And so putting it over the writing is okay, but again, I would still encourage you to put it on the back or where there is no writing. So I'm going to show you an experiment that I did in our archives. One day I opened a box of records and pulled out this document, and it fell to the floor actually in this shape. Remember me telling you, folded documents, if you fold them and unfold them enough times, they're going to come apart. The fibers in the paper become damaged and they will come apart. So this is what happened in this case. This is the deed record, and it had been folded and folded so many times that it literally came apart at the creases. And so I thought to myself, I wonder what it would look like and how it would work if I used document repair tape, archival tape, to put this document back together. Again, I don't encourage you to do this with every document if you have several of these, but I did this as an experiment to show people that I teach what it looks like. So I used the document repair tape like this that you can purchase just about anywhere, and I put this document back together. And this is what it looks like. It's kind of hard to see a little bit. There's a couple of small, tiny pieces that are gone that had probably chipped away over years, but it actually came out pretty good. You can still read the document, and it came together pretty well. So it can be done, but I would encourage you to use that tape very sparingly. Next, I want to talk about record storage. You know, we can take care of our records, we can preserve our records, we can do all the steps I've talked about in this presentation to take care of our records. But if we're not storing them properly, then we have done all that for naught. We've got to pay attention to how we store our records. We cannot, or we should not, store them in attics, basements, garages, or places where it is not temperature and humidity controlled. Now, I understand that many of us, this is the only places that we have to put our records, and I get that. And so we just need to make sure that we take care of those records. We're constantly checking on those records to make sure they're not deteriorating. We need to store our records in a dry environment, and here's the kicker: off the floor. The reason I put off the floor is because there's many times our houses over the United States and different countries, we've seen this recently, that have flooded. And if you have left your records on the floor and the floodwaters come into your home, and they can damage those records. So I always encourage people to store them a little bit off the floor. So if you have a catastrophe like that that happens, at least the waters will not get to your records. We want to store our records where the temperatures and the humidity levels are consistent. I always talk to people about, I know you can't live in an archives. You know, we don't have those temperature and humidity levels that are constantly controlled. But in our homes, what we can do is that we can keep those temperatures and humidity levels at a consistent level. That inconsistency is what causes the damage. And so the consistency is what we're looking for. We do not want fluctuating temperatures and fluctuating Paper is